Fuel main engine soon will throttle back to 72% of rated performance down in the bucket, reducing the stress on the shuttle as it goes transonic.
Telephone call
I remember my parents waking me up and we went down and we watched you guys land on the moon, which was
photographing the zone and pearl of what stars you could see. Challenger, only seconds after leaving the launch pad.
Because there wasn't any television, there wasn't anybody taking pictures. You watched animation.
40 minutes after it exploded,
just has the same seats that the little car has.
Going back to the moon, back to the future, and this time back to set.
I should say.
So you associated.
I know that the jet of the lunar module lander, the lunar lander, would have created an enormous crater. It would have scoured
What you saw.
I have very hazy memories.
Well, I do that. The first mission is scheduled to land on Mars on July the 4th, 1997.
Well, no, but what we saw was we all were gathered around the old curved top radio and listened.
Talking about how many feet we're going to the left and right. And then I said, contact light, engine stop.
Extended human missions to the moon as early as 2015.
We launched a new spacecraft as part of the re-energized space program that will send American
Things, and then Neil said, Houston, already based. The Eagle has landed.
That's just
Man, how about that?
That was very exciting.
Not a bad line.
Dedicated to the truth seekers. Question everything. I know we have still not shattered that highest and hardest glass ceiling, but someday someone will, and hopefully sooner than we might think.
Zetics, who derive their name from Zetio, to search out or to investigate, they fairly claim they have frequently and practically proved that the surface shape of the Earth and sea are, generally speaking, horizontal.
The face of the deep is frozen. Job 3830.
Electromagnetic mass, which can increase the ordinary mechanical mass of the bodies, or in more modern terms, the increase should arise from their electromagnetic self-energy. An example of flat Earth electromagnetism in the Tesla shield, the outer ring, is at the Antarctic Circle, with the inner ring at the North Pole creating a dipole connection to the electromagnetic dome, core pole positive with surrounding negative energy get their energy. How tides work on a flat Earth model and increased electromagnetism when salt is added. Scalar waves can be warped into a dome around objects, such as cities or houses. Force field is generally known as a Tesla shield, and it would be analogous to the shields referred to in the popular Star Trek series. Tesla shields have a definite defensive application and could not in any way be used for offensive purposes. The only defense from a blast of a scalar wave howitzer would be a Tesla shield. Electrical force is similar to gravity in that is inverse proportional to the square of the distance between charges. By the 18th century, physicist Charles Coulomb defined the quantity of electricity later known as a coulomb and determined the force law between electric charges, known as Coulomb's law. Coulomb's law is similar to the law of gravity in that the electrical force is inversely proportional to the distance of the charges squared and proportional to the product of the charges. By the end of the 18th century, we had determined that electric charge could be stored in a conducting body if it is insulated from its surroundings, being produced by the dynamo or capacitors that provided the input. A second way a Tesla coil produces a gain of energy is the increase in voltage as the longitudinal waves or ether flows across the secondary windings. As it flows across the secondary, voltage increases to extremely high levels. In this step, the gain of the system is further increased. This voltage increase is taking place without any magnetic induction or conventional transformer effect. The third way a Tesla coil produces a gain of energy is during the broadcast of longitudinal waves. As Tesla demonstrated, longitudinal waves have a self-sustaining or moment effect. Applying that power, this produces an even larger gain of energy. Since the Earth generates its own electromagnetic current from the ice wall, scaffolding is not necessary with his generators. He has to initiate the current and use the scaffolding to fold it into the center. One might surmise that the heavy water firmament can only exerts additional pressure or opposite resistance to.
Providing the necessary waveform shaping. This is considered to be the magnetic pulse aligning atoms in the metal. Eventually, all of the atoms are aligned, and so not further effect can be produced by further pulsing. This alignment can be destroyed if the metal bar is heated to a sufficiently high temperature, forcing the atoms into such an energetic state that the alignment is lost. It should perhaps be stressed here that the magnet itself does not have any power, in spite of seeming to have. Tom Bearden explains this clearly by pointing out that what happens is that the opposite poles of the magnet created a dipole, which unbalances the random quantum foam nature of the local environment, the zero-point energy field, and that causes continuous energy flows from the environment. When a current flows through a straight wire B, a magnetic field is produced around it. The character of this field is shown in the figure over the case. When the current is flowing upwards through a vertical wire, when the current is flowing downwards, the field is of exactly the same character, except that the lines of force run in the non-opposite direction round the wire. IRGRMV. Elasticity and magnetism. 19. Now by reversing the current as is stated above, we get a similar magnetic field with the lines of force going around in the opposite direction. We may take diagram IV to represent the magnetic field in the northern circle, with as the north center. But instead of reversing the current, and so altering the direction of the circular lines of force, we may take a second field to represent the southern circle with the lines of force going round the BC and so from B to C in the opposite direction. As represented in diagram G, this will illustrate the currents flowing around the south pole. In the above diagram, a circular current is represented as going along the wire from A through N to B in one direction, and so on from B to C to S in another direction. The electric current thus going in an opposite direction through the wire, at S, from that at point N. The circular lines of forces, or magnetic currents, travel around S in an opposite direction to those which travel around point N. And thus we have an illustration of the two great currents which circle respectively around the north and south magnetic poles. These great currents meet in the middle and neutral line, or zone, called the equator, and interlock like the cogs of two connected wheels working together in harmony. This we will illustrate in diagram 6, in our next chapter. BYLDYBLOUNT and LBERTSMITH. 2, 0. 2 poles and 2 vortices. CHETERIV. TWO. sacred sciences of electricity and magnetism if they would arrive at a clear conception of the motions of the heavenly bodies. Speaking generally, we may state that the stars in the southern circle move in circles round the southern center, while those in the north move around the north center. The sun, moon, and planets move in spirals which are almost, but not quite, circles. Coining a word, we might say that those bodies which are called planets, or wanderers, sometimes spiral round the south center when they have south declination. They all revolve much in the same way as the sun, the motion of which has already been explained. There are, however, some peculiarities or special characteristics in their orbits, especially in that of the moon, which will take 2 or 3 chapters to go into more fully, and so we must leave the moon's motions for future consideration. At present, proceeding with our explanation of the 2 vortices, we will further illustrate them by showing the action of 2 cogwheels when working together in harmony. This diagram, no. VL, showing 2 cogwheels interlocking or working together on their respective shafts or centers, may roughly illustrate the action of the 2 great currents or sets of currents, flowing round the north and south centers like 2 great vortices. The upper wheel may represent the circles or lines of forces revolving around the north center, as represented by the belt BC. This great belt will represent the magnetic force revolving around the Earth between the equator and the Tropic of Cancer, while the lesser belt GH may represent similar forces revolving around the Arctic Circle. The lower wheel illustrates similar lines or belts of force revolving around the southern center, the broader belt, DEF, showing the position of those forces between the equator and the Tropic of Capricorn, and the 2 poles and 2 vortices. 23. PL and GIRMVI. 2, 4. 2 poles and 2 vortices. Lesser belt JK, those about the Antarctic Circle. T spokes of the wheels may represent meridians, which AC according to this time only already induced must converge south of the equator as well as north. OF course, in the case of the 2 wheels, the cogs would be rigid, being made of solid wood, or metal. But the great magnetic currents are not rigid, but play into one another at the points of contact about the so-called equator. This has already been explained in a previous chapter on the sun's motion. Sun, being a comparatively small, light, electric body, is carried around by one set of currents in the south until, partly by its momentum and partly by magnetism, it is projected into the other set of currents in the north. Now if the northern currents go round in one direction, it is clear that the southern currents must go round in an opposite direction, so that the 2 currents may work together in harmony. And this agrees with the facts previously brought forward from the testimony of those in the south. If a spectator in the north looks towards his center, he will see those celestial orbs which have north declination, rise in the east on his right hand. But if a spectator in the southern circle looks towards his center, he sees the southern constellations and the sun rising in the east, but on his left hand. Thus the 2 vortices work together in harmony, as we have illustrated in the cogwheels. Respecting the ether, we may briefly state that our own conclusions are that all motion can be traced to the circulating movement of the ether, and that the ether is therefore substantial, or, in other words, a fine form of matter, something approaching the spiritual, if we may apply a material term to such a refined substance. And this agrees with the fact that God created light, or the luminiferous ether, before He made the sun. We have generally been taught that matter exists only in 3 forms: the solid, the liquid, and the gaseous. But there may be a 4th form of matter, as much finer than gaseous, as gaseous is finer than the liquid, and this form we believe to be the luminiferous ether. This ether, being a form of matter, has many, though perhaps not all, the attributes of ordinary matter, such as 2 poles and 2 vortices. 25. Elasticity, density, motion, and momentum. It thus carries around within all the heavenly bodies at their various distances from the centers. According to the popular theory of gravitation, these bodies have to pass through the ether, or some such substance, which is said to fill all space. But this substance, however rare, would continually impede their progress, and would ultimately bring the universe to a standstill. And so the inventors of the gravitation theory had to invent a sort of frictionless ether to allow all their heavenly bodies to pass through it in constant periods of equal times. But a frictionless substance would be no substance at all, and the idea is contrary to all our experience and experiments. Truth does not require such contradictions and absurdities. Ether, which fills all space from the earth to the firmamental vault above, being enclosed in that vault, circulates, and, being substantive, it carries around with it all the heavenly bodies in their various orbits, which are more or less circular. Has bodies have different times of revolution according to their varying heights, which heights are regulated by their varying natures, sizes, and densities. The sun and moon, which are by far the largest of these celestial orbs, are not more than about 30 miles, or about half a degree, in diameter. The highest of these floating orbs is probably not more than some 6,000 or 7,000 miles high.
These have different times of revolution according to their varying heights, which heights are regulated by their varying natures, sizes, and densities. The Sun and Moon, which are by far the largest of these celestial orbs, are not more than about 30 miles, or about half a degree, in diameter. The highest of these floating orbs is probably not more than some 6 or 7,000 miles high. They are all for the most part mere lights, or more literally light holders, that is centers of electric, or magnetic forces. These forces radiate from them and affect the atmosphere, and whatever comes in contact with that atmosphere, or whatever breathes it. But this opens up too vast a field to be treated of here. We trust we have given sufficient evidence to show that there is good cause why Zetetic's altogether discard, the modern theory of universal attraction, and unavailing pulling and tugging of all bodies to get together. Have shown that there is no need of such an absurd hypothesis in connection with the plain truth, but that known and practical forces such as electricity and magnetism are quite sufficient to account for all celestial phenomena. Question of the motions of light, or the path of the sun's rays. Even our opponents must admit that there may be a difference between the path of a luminous and moving body, and the path of the rays of light which flow from that body. In this connection we shall have to consider the question whether rays of light move in straight lines or in great curves. Common opinion asserts that the former is the case, whereas it has been shown that the latter is the truth. This is mentioned to show that we are starting no new idea to account for southern phenomena. Electricity behaves in a similar manner both north and south of the equator. Recognizing that electricity and light are simply two forms of one force, we shall first proceed to say a few words about degrees, and then try to answer an objection which may be raised against what we have already advanced respecting the two vortices and the equatorial figure 8. The term degree, or degrees, is used in a variety of senses, but the primary meaning is that of a step or grade in progression, whether of rank, dignity, or distance, or the divisions of a circle whose circumference is divided into 360 parts. The latter is the meaning intended here. But we have to inquire what it is that so divides the circle, and what circle it is which is so divided, and, in the case of latitude, whether there be a circle or not. We see what are called degrees marked on a globe and we are led to conclude from astronomical works that degrees are necessarily connected with a spherical body. But there could be degrees on a plane surface, or the divisions of a circle lying in a horizontal plane, and the degrees lying along the radius or diameter of such a plane circle, which of course would be no. Degrees. 27. Part of a circle, so that, prima facie, degrees are no proof of the globular theory. We ought further to inquire what it is that makes these degrees. The astronomer makes lines on the globe the geographer puts them on the map and conforms his lines of longitude to the globular theory, and, rightly or wrongly, he makes the general outlines of his continents conform to these degrees. But what we have to ask is, what is it that constitutes a degree in nature, out of doors in the open, not in the study of the astronomer? In pursuing this inquiry we shall find that a degree is dependent upon, and is measured by the position of rays of light that is, rays of sunshine.
Bye.